Now, Mr. Eagleburger or Larry, let me begin by saying that I hope that never in foreign policy or domestic policy or any other policy we decide that it is a course of wisdom to rise above principle. And while you were making your eloquent speech, and it was written well and delivered well, but I found as I followed you in the text that it was so similar to a speech to the House of Commons by a man some years ago named Chamberlain. He came back talking about peace in our time and how we could get along with this fellow over there in Germany. And had it not been for a guy who later became prominent, he might have gotten by with it. But we didn't. Let me direct your attention, sir, to the 1990 State Department Human Rights Report to which I've just alluded. In particular, Section 6C, which covers forced labor. And I will say to my colleague from North Carolina, Mr. Sanford, that I have pretty good information that we are importing a substantial amount of textiles manufactured with and by slave labor in China. In any case, Mr. Eagleburger, you will note that the third sentence indicates that Chinese slave labor camps have to turn a profit. You will also note that the report indicates that essentially all labor in Communist China is compulsory. Now, I've got a couple of charts that I want you to look at. The first one that I want up is a chart outlining the American law prohibiting importation of forced labor goods. Can you put that one up? I do this to impress it upon myself as much as anybody else. All goods, wares, articles, and merchandise mined, produced, or manufactured wholly or in part in any foreign country by convict labor or forced labor or an indentured labor under penal sanctions shall not be entitled to entry at any of the ports of the United States, and the importation thereof is hereby prohibited. Considering the serious charge made in the State Department Human Rights Report, I have this morning asked the General Accounting Office to begin an investigation to see which goods from Communist China, if any, should be banned under U.S. law. Now, I'll go back to the point made there, Mr. Secretary. Considering what is said in your own report, should not all Communist Chinese goods be banned?
Senator, the only way I can answer the question is any Chinese goods that are produced in contravention of that piece of legislation clearly should. I cannot, at this point, I couldn't possibly concede to you that everything exported from China to the United States is produced by convict labor.
Now, on the first item on the list, the technology transfer agreement between Iran and Communist China, have you personally examined this agreement to see whether it provides for nuclear weapons or ballistic missiles or ballistic missile technology to be transferred to Iran?
Senator, you've got me in an awkward spot because we have unconfirmed reports of such an agreement. I have not seen anything specifically confirming that there is an agreement. And to go into any more detail than that, I'd have to ask you to go into executive session. But we have unconfirmed reports, is all.
I understand. Okay. And Mr. Chairman.
Maybe at the conclusion of the open round, we should go into executive session. I'd like to know the answer to that question.
Very well. The second question, and this may fall under the same category. According to Radio Tehran, the military transfer agreement was signed on January 21, roughly 6 weeks after your last trip to Beijing. Did you attempt to convince the Chinese regime to stop arms sales to the Middle East at all? Did the subject come up?
The subject of medium-range ballistic missiles came up in some detail in our discussions. That is the subject we specifically
Must discuss in the executive session.
Well, I mean, I can tell you, we discussed that subject of medium-range missiles with the Chinese when we were there. Aside from that, in an open session, I can't go any further.